PodSaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in sassy. Sponsored by LeadrPro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Welcome to PodSaaS. Today we have Andy Eastis from SkuVault. How you doing, Andy?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. You're joining us from Kentucky, right?
Yes. Glad to be here.
And you said born and bred in Kentucky.
Yep. Born and bred.
Very cool. Awesome. Before we kind of go into what we like to call like rapid fire questions, want to give you the opportunity to give us like the elevator pitch on what SkuVault is, and then ultimately also, you know, who makes a great candidate as an ideal customer for you guys. So feel free to go for it.
SkuVault helps our customers in e-commerce solve their most difficult challenges, managing and tracking inventory at scale. Essentially, we take customers all the way from purchasing to receiving and the fulfillment process, and as well as connecting up to all the different e-commerce platforms in their tech stacks. Our ideal customer ranges anywhere in revenue from 5 to 150 million in revenue. We're pretty industry agnostic. And a lot of times people are using us when they get to a stage where they need more advanced warehouse functionality as well as the e-commerce components.
You basically give a lot of visibility into the back-end logistics of running an e-commerce company.
As our customers move to more distributed inventory, which is the trend, working with multiple of their own warehouses, as well as multiple 3PLs, Amazon, FBA, Walmart, fulfillment services, having a source of truth for their inventory becomes crucial. How do you even order when you don't know where you have and it's all distributed in these different places? Having that single source of truth is highly valuable.
Makes a ton of sense. Cool. We'll jump into the series of rapid fire questions. Nothing is too crazy, so I think we'll be okay here. But yeah, we just really want to kind of understand you as a person and just kind of like a little bit more about your journey. So if you're ready, we're gonna get things started.
Let's go.
Do you have a favorite entrepreneur?
Yeah, one of my favorites is a guy named Ricardo Simler.
Okay.
He wrote a book called The 7-Day Weekend.
Okay.
Actually. And I believe he's a super hard worker, but he just has very different, and it's an older book, but he has very different views on how to manage and grow a business, contrary to a lot of the popular opinions. And a lot of those have stood the test of time, even since he wrote that book. But he just thinks very differently, and I enjoyed that. Yeah.
I'm going to stay on topic for that for a quick second. So what was one piece of advice out of that book that you feel like you've taken away that you practice maybe daily or on a weekly basis or continue to reference?
Yeah, so he was really big on, I don't know if he used these words, but giving the ownership to the team. So he was big about like, hey, someone in a department has some idea, we could do this business service. And traditionally they'd be like, oh no, that's not what this business is, right? But he'd let them go for it. And, you know, and over time, many of those ideas turned into huge pieces of their business. And just about like how he manages people, you know, they had a lot of manufacturing plants, and you know, he gave them flex work schedules, and they could, again, you know, whatever schedules they wanted, and they worked as a team to make sure. And he said, look, these are adults. They have mortgages, they have families, they manage to do all this stuff. Why can't we trust them? Like if one guy needs to leave at 3:00 to see his kid's soccer game, and someone else is willing to cover him, let them figure that out. And you know, it worked for him. But everyone else at the time, especially, even more so than now, is like, oh no, you can't give those workers, that won't work, you know. But it worked, you know. And so we've very much tried to mimic some of those things at SkuVault, and it really ties in. There's a book by Chris Zug, and he talks about, it's called The Founder's Mentality, and it talks about how you can inject that mindset and mind frame into the people and give them that ownership, and you know, you have to empower them to do that, but if you do, it can be real powerful.
Yeah, I read I think it was like a McKinsey article recently about the idea of purpose in the workforce, and that's becoming increasingly important as part of building culture, is having everybody understand their purpose, their why for being where they are. And I think a lot of that does center around the idea of team building, the idea of like community and taking a step back, and as opposed to like, the traditional roles and schedules and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm a firm believer in that belief system and that philosophy too, where it's like, I don't care about you clocking in. I definitely don't want somebody thinking about clocking in, clocking out in certain hours. Like I don't care if somebody works from 12 a.m. to, 2 a.m. or whatever, as long as it's deliverables focused and you get things done, that's all that really matters to me. So I think makes a ton of sense. And it's weird that it's not practiced enough, I feel like.
Sharing the wins, sort of helping to tie the work you're doing to the end result, like especially with developers, right? You're working on this stuff and then like maybe customer success sees it, but it gets in the hands of these customers and these people, and it helps the companies grow and it creates jobs. And like, how are we sharing that back to where you see, hey, 6 months ago, all that dev work you did on this project, has created jobs for people and like given them a livelihood. And it can be hard to share that back in a meaningful way, but if you can, it's a great motivator.
So another quick question is, I'm somebody who is vastly inspired by content or different types of content that I ingest, right? So it could be a movie, it could be a book, it could be music, is a big part of it too. But anything that you've watched, listened to, heard, read that you go back to in the same way, where it's like maybe it's inspired you, made you think a little bit differently, shifted perspective?
Yeah, and I'll go way back in my reading history, but there's an author that I found some of my grandfather's books and got into growing up, Louis L'Amour, known as a Western writer. He wouldn't like you saying that though, but he has one that's out of his typical genre or era that he writes about, called The Walking Drum. And I guess it's about a father who gets kidnapped and the son is going to find him, and but a lot about purpose and like how to keep your word and what the sort of core things that make it enjoyable to work with someone. I've referred back to that many times.
Very cool. For me, that book would be like based on kind of what you're talking about, would be the 4 Agreements, which is, I think, the same kind of idea of like one of those agreements is like being impeccable with your word, right? I think these are such small little things that I think are no-brainers, but in today's world, I mean, like I think maybe in our parents' generation, it was like such more value behind some of these statements, and it's lost some of its meaning now today. Just the way that information is shared so rapidly, and but a lot of those, back to your point, it's like those are things that are all about integrity and being able to like follow through on things that you put out there in the universe. And I think it's largely important.
How do you find? Go ahead.
No, I mean, I think like that's part of the hiring process too, is like finding people who understand that, because that's the kind of people that you want on your team.
We created
go ahead.
We created core values a number of years ago, and we involved the whole team at the time in it to help create those and choose the ones that fit us the most. And it's amazing to me how much in interviews even people will ask you what they are and how you exemplify them. And probably when I was younger, I never would have asked that in an interview, right? But like people care about it and they notice. And like we create a 1-pager every year that just helps keep the whole company on the same page as far as strategic vision for the year, and all walking in the same direction. But one year we added on the bottom, stay humble, work hard, be kind. And it was how many people on the team came and said that resonated with them was also amazing to me. Like it's just
Those are like the intangibles, right? Like I think as as a founder in the leadership role, right? But that come back to you, and those are like the heartwarming wins that like has nothing to do with product, has nothing to do with really growth, but it does have to do with culture, and it has to do with like building a community which lives under this idea of what a company is, right? So I think that's very powerful, and obviously speaks volumes to kind of like I think what you've instituted in terms of the culture what you guys have built. So that's awesome. I think a lot of these things also stem kind of like from our experiences as growing up, as well as kind of like our own work experiences. And so has there been a job that you've really hated, or anything that you've gone through and that you're like, I never want to go back there? That kind of like in those 25th hour, you're like, screw it. It doesn't matter what it's going to take. I'm going to overcome this obstacle because the alternative is that. Or like in the back of your mind, obviously you're not going to go back to those scenarios, but those drivers?
Yeah, so I started working as a busboy when I was 14. Actually, over those next few years, had a couple jobs as busboy, um, many of which were great jobs. There was that first one though. It was a local restaurant that had been around like 100 years and passed down from generations. But then the most recent generation gave it to a son-in-law, and so he was my manager and the owner and boss at this little restaurant, and he was just horrible. Like he tried to get it one day to dry shave without shaving cream because he thought we should be shaving better, me and the other bus.
What?
Like it was just crazy. And I just left and came back. But the it was a great intro into like a bad boss makes any job horrible, right? Like you could have your dream job, but if you have a bad manager, it can just ruin it. And I think in my experience, this has been validated. Like people leave companies because of bad managers.
That's a good point. I mean, I think that's a great learning lesson from a bad situation, is that, and probably, to the topic we were just talking about, probably makes you a great manager because of the fact that you've gone through that bad experience at such a young age, but probably formidable in your mind, in terms of like, that was a horrible experience. I don't ever want to be that person kind of
Yep.
thing.
And that restaurant shut down a couple of years later after 100 years in business.
Wow, that speaks. I mean, proof is in the pudding, man. What can you do? Now, being in your position, obviously starting any startup is hard. Going through and starting anything from where you're like green pastures, kind of like white space, and like building something that's innovative is hard. What keeps you motivated in that 25th hour? Because I'm sure there's like been obstacles, kind of getting things off the ground, and your back is against the wall, whether it's like your runway is about to close out, or like you go live with a product and your customer's expecting X and it's not there yet, or it's anything where you've kind of like those moments, not necessarily exactly those war stories yet, but what keeps you pressing forward to get over them?
It's twofold. It's the team and the customers. So we have a lot of very loyal, long-time customers. Even if we release a feature that isn't exactly how they want it, like they're very loyal, and that keeps us going. Like we know they're using us every day. We become a mission critical software once we're implemented, and so that piece is very powerful to like keep you motivated, as well as the team. So we've always said from day one, like the team is everything. If we don't have the right people on the bus, rowing in the same direction, to quote from Jim Collins, but it's all about the team, right? And I think that's the only way we've gotten where we are today, is we've been meticulous about building the team at the different stages and continuing to grow the team, but not just for growth's sake. Like we want good people who can work together well, be kind. And it's like that big Google study a few years ago. What makes a team great? After a few years and all this money to do this study, the result was just be nice, be kind. And those teams with kind team members perform better. And so that's a big thing. And it's like, sometimes you'll have someone on a team is just bringing everyone down, and it's just, you don't want to go to work because you have this, it's like the bad manager we talked about, right? You don't want negativity every day, and it's hard when you come in and have to deal with that every day.
Yeah, I've dealt with those situations. It's very tough. So growing up in Kentucky, what did you want to be as a kid when you were growing up?
I don't know if it was driven from my parents more than me, but I had in my head I was going to be an architect. I think on family vacations, we'd always go look at houses for architecture. And so that did seem pretty cool. I guess I still plan and put stuff together, just it's digital.
When you're the idea of building something, producing something, it is all very much related, I think, to like building a business. And there's a lot of like, I think soft skills, as well as kind of like just perspectively, like how you look at problem solving when you're building, or producing something. And just having a conversation with the last guest around he came from a theater background and produced plays in college, and he's saying like there's a very similar experience from that to building a company. He's built two now. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think architecture is the very same thing. It's like every house that you build or every building that you build is kind of like its own business, right? It's a short-term business, but you're creating and you're building something, and then you move on to the next thing. You have to start again from the very beginning, and hopefully as you go from one to the next, you're getting faster and faster, more optimal in terms of how you do it. But those metaphors and those things are very symbolic of one another.
A few years ago, a mentor called me out that I didn't have any hobbies because I've been working for so many years. And he said, like, if you want to sustainably keep working like this, you need a hobby to like. And I got into woodworking, and it's been great, just like at night or at home. And I think one thing I liked about it is what we create on a day-to-day basis at SkuVault is all in the cloud. And I mean, you see the result talking to the customers, but you can't touch it. And also, I think I enjoy the piece of it that it's just me. So like, I love the team aspect, but sometimes if something goes wrong, like there's just so much going into a big project that, it's not like, but with the woodworking, anything goes wrong, I know exactly who to point to, right? Like I know exactly what went wrong. And then I can just physically touch it. And I have great ideas when I'm doing that at night, right? Like
Yeah, no, everybody needs that. And that's such a great piece of advice. You need something to disconnect, and takes your mind into a different place outside of what you're doing. And I think I think like the idea, Alexis Ohanian has talked about this a lot of times. We're about, founder of Reddit, about hustle porn and the idea of working these crazy, insane hours. And, you have a lot of there's motivational speakers and entrepreneurs out there that really promote the idea of outworking everybody else. But I do find personally too that, and I encourage this for my team, is finding those moments throughout the day for you to take your personal breaks where you're just disconnecting and thinking about something entirely differently. For me, it's about fitness, and it's being able to go on runs or being able to go, hit weights or whatever. You just completely are disconnected from what you're doing, and you're focused on that activity, which is so great to recharge and then also look at things from a different set of lenses or a new facet. And I found a lot of times figuring out those kinds of activities is going to help actually increase your productivity. It's not about sitting in front of a laptop and then just forcing yourself to be there X amount of hours. It's really about finding ways to break the monotony, to problem solve in a more creative way, and putting yourself in other environments that allows you to then get unblocked from then finding another solution. I think that's awesome that you do that. Another question that I had, is obviously you're just talking about the amount of work that it takes. I don't know if what your family life is like, but your personal life, obviously, it can always, you hear a lot of that can suffer from somebody who goes and starts a business. So how do you try to find balance between your personal life and your professional life?
I do have young children, so I do feel torn in a lot of senses, right? The time is now for the kids. They're only kids so long, but also the time is now for work, right? And I think I have a pretty good balance most weeks now. I also think it's important for the kids to see the parents working hard, right? So it's you want both sides of that. But yeah, I think you just have to find what works for you, and flexible schedule too, right? I get a lot of work done after the kids go to bed every night, but that means I can be there, after school before bed, and spend time with them there. And over the years, this is interesting for me. My schedule has changed dramatically. Not that the kids' schedule changed, but there will be a year or two where I work these hours a lot, and then I might sort of shift that. I'm a pretty early riser now, but I wasn't always, and I used to late into the night. I don't do that anymore because now I feel horrible the next day, right? But so it's I think it's fine and natural that it should shift over time, with what's going on in your life, and hopefully you can be flexible enough for that. You can't always with customers.
Yeah, for sure. Anything that created that presence or awareness of reminding yourself to strike that balance?
Yeah, in the earlier years, I probably struggled with that more of working a little too much and not having enough home balance on the scale. Um, but there was actually one video in particular that I used to have as a reminder, pulling up in my to-do list once a week. It's a little short video. It's called A Like, but it just like pulls at the heartstrings, I guess, but very much about children and just having that joy in your life. So I literally had a reminder of like, I'd watch that video and be like, oh dang, I need to stop working. I need to go home. But that was helpful. Like whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that those are little stories I feel like people should hear, because those are the things that's like can drastically make a difference, right? Because even like, obviously everything's different in hindsight, but I think like once you are going through it and I think these are like kind of like pivotal learning experiences where, it'll change the trajectory. Like if you don't have a happy home life balance, it's going to be hard for you to be the best in your professional life balance and vice versa. So I think like, and then, obviously the drain on mental health too is like, it's only sustainable for so long and finding those things and prioritizing.
I had to learn over a few years, I can't work 16 hours straight and remain productive, right? Like there's the point where that productivity goes so far down, it's not worth even working, right? Like you need to take a break and come back and you'll get a lot more done than if you didn't.
Yeah, but I feel like, it's only, and for me, it's been just recently, I would say in the past few years, that I've kind of like learned to be self-acceptance of that fact. Like, and not, because I would always be under that mentality. Exactly, power through it. If you're not feeling pain or like you're not feeling exhausted, you're not doing enough, right? But then it was exactly, that's how it would feel. And it was almost like that chip on your shoulders, like I'm going to outwork anybody and everybody. But then, then it was like realizing, and the proof also happens when it's like when you get the outcomes that are more favorable faster, and you start relieving yourself of some of that pressure you put on yourself, because it's like it is showing itself in terms of like productivity and outcomes when you do take more time for yourself. And it's hard to, I think, like, sometimes for founders to like mentally grasp that concept, but it's so important. I think when they do, a lot of times I've seen is like that's when they hit kind of like that growth trajectory is like, okay, things are kind of like all coming into place, and it's not just about continuing to hammer this like square peg into a round hole, but it's like, how can I be more effective? Helps prioritize as opposed to trying to do every single thing at one time. That being said, what would you like your legacy to be?
I think it's about leadership. Like, right, when you think of growing an organization, I had a couple of years where I was reading a lot about organizational psychology, and I sort of had this vision that my goal was to work myself out of a job. Now, I knew this wasn't like actually possible, right? But I think it's a good goal as far as like, hey, can you create an organization that can organize itself and grow itself without needing you constantly? And again, like, I don't think, I think the leader is important, not that they're irreplaceable by any means, but so I'm not saying that's my like real life goal, but that's like how I want to build the business, right? Like, I want it to be where it can function on its own, that ideas can be fostered without me having to drive them, ideas from any level of the organization. And it can grow itself. Like they can bring in new people. I don't have to be the only person interviewing. We got out of that years ago, which has been great, right? But how can that organization do that on its own? And so, like, if you try to set the structures and the frameworks where people are empowered to do what they need to do, but also have guidelines and all on the same page as far as where you're trying to go, you can step back more and let them do what they're great at.
I agree. Cool. We went off on a few tangents. It got a little bit longer than normal, but it was good. I would like to, just take a step back though, and, kind of talk about your work experience, right? So from busboy to CEO, right? Like, I'm sure there's quite a few jobs in between there, and life experiences, that have led you to this position. But, just walk me through, before even talking about SkuVault and the idea for it. kind of like what's your background and what kind of work experience have you gone through already?
Yeah, so busboy, multiple places. I also, I guess around middle school, started at a lawn mowing business for a number of years every summer. Um, and then got into selling on eBay. So yard sales, estate sales. Um, I guess in middle school, started that. Me and a friend were doing it a lot, going to our friends' parents' basements, attic garages, taking 30%. It was like the we sell your stuff on eBay store model, just no storefront. So that was fun, learned a lot there. That was my entry into e-commerce. That business, my friend grew, we ended up focusing it on shoes and apparel, building supplier relationships, brand relationships. So I sort of say like turning it into a real business. And then I got out of that when I went to college. I went to U of L, Speed School for Industrial Engineering. And that was where a lot of my like more logistics side of experience came in. Started learning about that. Did my internship at a copper bar fabrication plant in Eminence, Kentucky. It was my first insight into larger companies running big, expensive ERPs that don't really do the job right, or they're not using it right, at least, right? And so, I mean, I came in there, I was a student, thought I was, great. And I mean, they had 87% of their orders were going out late and big name customers. And it's like, to me, I'm like, oh, what is going on? We got to fix this. Well, to start digging into it, they were running the business off a patchwork of 12 Microsoft Access databases, even though they had this multi-million-dollar a year software that basically was just doing asset management, even though it was an ERP. But in those 12 databases running the actual operations, they didn't have an inventory system. So they never knew what they had, so they couldn't order properly. Metal has a long lead time. So there's just no way, right? So easy fix. We got that down. I think by the time I left, so built their 13th database, and it was an inventory system. They still use it today, years and years later. But I think by the time I left, it was down to like 22% lates or something. But just tracking the inventory properly was, got you a lot of the way there, right? And I learned a lot on that job. I'm not a programmer. I was Access front end, SQL backend, so I learned a little on the job. But more importantly, I learned a lot about like getting the people involved that were going to be using the system, getting their input and feedback, so they felt a part of the process, whether or not you took the input, right, or took action on it. But I like ease of use was a big learning there as well. So these people didn't want to switch to tracking the inventory. They hadn't had to for years. So it's just an extra step they felt like. Now, once they figured out, oh, I don't have to hunt for things for hours, then they start getting on board, right? But also a number of people in that facility couldn't read. And I grew up in the city and didn't think of that when I was building the UI. But okay, I had to go back and shift things to pictures instead of words on buttons and just make it more intuitive. And I think that has served me well, learning that lesson the hard way. As we built SkuVault, like that was always a focus from day one, was ease of use. A user should be able to go to a page and know what to do on it without going to any help articles, right? Like it should be that intuitive. Uh, and so, yeah, built that inventory system. My friend was still growing that e-commerce business I mentioned, shoes and apparel. So he called me back and said, hey, I know you just built an inventory system. We need help. We've tried to launch 2 that are on the market. They both failed. Don't know what to do. Help me find one and implement it. So I spent about 3 months looking at the market, doing demos, didn't find anything that worked how I thought it should. So decided to build him one. Had to convince him of that. He was not keen on the idea. It was like a custom dev project. So I was like building websites for people at the time. So throughout college, I was building e-commerce websites on like WooCommerce and different things, just to make some money and get some experience. Which was one of my most troubling things in college. Is like I was ready to join the world in middle school, right? Like, and then I don't know, just everyone, the elders in your life are like, oh, you got to go to college, and I learned a lot in college, so I'm a big fan. But at the same time, like I was just itching to get started. And so I was building these websites, and it's like I'm a huge fan of this new movement of doing based learning, going into a lot of the different schools, and like kids can be a useful, helpful member of society, right? Like you don't have to wait till you're 22 and out of college to do anything in the world. Um, so on that note, I started building this inventory system, launched it or got close to launching it and realized like, why did I have to build this? There's a hole in the market. As soon as we launched it, we sold it to a second company in California. So one in Kentucky, one in California. That's when we said, hey, we want to take this to market. There's a whole obvious gap. We knew we needed to rebuild it, make it a web-based version. So that took another year and a half to rebuild and launch it like that, which launched SkuVault web-based app in December 2012. But as we were building that, I dropped out of college in the middle of senior year, to the chagrin of my family. Maybe 5 years after, they finally stopped hassling me about that. But for the first few years, they still did. But yeah, so dropped out, and it was a matter of I couldn't do great at both. Right? Like I could do decent at both, maybe, but I couldn't do great at both. And I figured I could always go back to school. This opportunity was here now. It may not be in a couple of years, right? So chose to do that. Very glad I did. But we launched that web-based app December 2012, SkuVault. That first year of being on the market, we sold 67 clients. 60, yeah, 66 of them I shook hands with in person. A lot of travel all around the country, direct to leads, facilities to try and sell them, but also trade shows and that kind of thing. Also,
Were you guys bootstrapped at this point, or were you able to raise some capital?
yep,
Okay.
or customer funded, however you want to say it. But let me mention those 66 out of those 67 were also mutual customers with at least one of our two main partners we launched with. And I highlight that because that continues to be a big part of the SkuVault story, is the partnerships and the tech stack ecosystem that our customers have to work with, which means we have to work with them seamlessly as well. So it's just like partnerships are a huge thing. If you can get into the right place, the right partners, they can drive a lot of leads and sales your way. And so we've embraced that and continued to put a lot of efforts into the partnership pieces as we've grown.
Yeah, I mean, either way, there was a piece of information there that you had touched upon that is still sticking with me. So I want to ask you this, or at least like bring awareness to it, which is the realization that people in some of these facilities can't read. Like when you talked about that, and I find that like so critical because I work with, we as a growth agency, we've worked with a lot of like companies that sell software solutions, all kinds of verticals, like, from funeral homes to gyms to, your more like enterprise related, type of deals to general contractors and all the whole nine. But there's definitely like certain industries where you have a certain like tech, like a steeper tech learning curve. And I've seen that in like manufacturing facilities or logistics companies and stuff like that. So I could see how that could be, getting the buy-in. It's not like that you don't have something that's going to solve the problem for them, but the onboarding experience or like trying to displace like some kind of like legacy software that they've had for 10 years, not necessarily realizing that there's a problem. They know that it sucks up a bunch of time, but it's almost like accepting of that as a status quo or just like part of their job. So to overcome that is hard. And I think like that's where, when you said that stuck out with me, because that's probably like one, with some of these clients that we worked with where they're trying to sell into these institutions like that, I don't think they think about that. Like they haven't sat on the ground floor to know like that the users or the end users of this product might be somebody in that situation where, like that's like maybe half of the workforce. And that's a barrier for them to actually sell a product because it's just not intuitive enough, or they just can't use it. So I think that's a huge point to bring up, because the fact that you worked in an environment like that to then understand it alongside of them is, I think, something that a lot of these founders, especially when they're working into building something that's selling into maybe like an antiquated space, to have to be cognizant about.
Yeah. And let me build on this just for a second. The past couple of years, we've been spending a lot of time on how we articulate that in the marketplace. with potentials, customers, partners, right? And so the tact we ended up taking was really working deeply with a lot of customers, and a lot of us internally even could articulate it differently, but we didn't all articulate it the same way. We have a lot of really knowledgeable people on the team. Like once you've launched 100+ customers on SkuVault, like you've gotten deep into their tech stack. I mean, you're a consultant at that point, right? And but we'd all say it differently. And so it became this question of like, how do we articulate this in a way they can understand? And what really are we even trying to articulate, right? And so what we were trying to articulate is, what is their promised land? Like, what in their head, what is the promised land of, if I get this all up and running great, like what does that get me? And so we ended up breaking it down into 6 problems. There's just a lot of customer interviews to get to this. But we break them down into like, hey, what are the immediate business problems? And then what is the solution to it? And then you can tie that to your product by saying, all right, what are the features of the product that solve that? So like for us, it's like unreliable inventory data. Well, that creates all kinds of problems. How do you fix it? What's the solution? Well, having a single source of truth is the solution. Okay, that's the master catalog in SkuVault. I don't want to go through all these, but oversells, lost sales due to out of stocks and ad hoc reordering, poor warehouse organization, missed ships, inefficient picking routes and workflows. So those were what they were for us. And that's what the customer could articulate. They could say those problems they were feeling on a day-to-day basis, but they weren't coming to us and many times couldn't articulate like, hey, what I need to do is establish inventory transparency, and then I need to maintain that going forward. Well, what they came and said is, hey, we have oversells and we keep missing out on sales because we're not ordering properly. Okay, but we need to be able to say, okay, great, we understand your problem. We've solved this for many people. Here's the solution that they solved it with, and here's exactly how you get here with feature. And that's when you can get into like the demo. Like demoing is not the first step to the selling, we've realized over time. Right? Like demoing the product is once you understand what the problems are, and you and the prospect can be on the same page about that, then you can say, okay, let's talk about how we can solve this for you. And it's just we're still maybe in the early stages even of this as far as pushing it out to all of our different documentation and content online, but it resonates with people. And so when they come in, we've done a lot of work in the past couple of years on our onboarding process as well. And it's like, hey, we actually now have from the sales team and then the handoff call, we know which one of these they want to solve first. So when we know that, we can say, hey, we don't actually need to launch every little bell and whistle the software offers. Let's get you what your biggest problems are solved first. That also allows us to deliver value quicker. Yep. And we all know, right, the quicker you can deliver value, the better chance you have of getting them through all the steps of onboarding, having good retention rates.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, that problem that you just talked about is like exactly a company that I've been advising for that's selling essentially an ERP for the steel industry. Like it's a big lift that typically takes them like 2 to 3 years to do an implementation of that level. And so that piece of advice of like solve the immediate problem first, where it's like, because I think not necessarily everybody thinks about this either when they launch a product, but like onboarding and getting all the data from all these like broken assets that they have is a pain in the ass. It's the hardest part. And it's a huge lift that nobody wants to do. And it takes a lot of time. So, but if you could break it up into chunks, with the almost for them feeling like it's a seamless experience, because like, all right, in month 1, we're just going to do this and don't worry about it. And you get like, 10% of the way of whatever the ERP needs, right? And then you get to like, maybe, the next feature or function, and that's like, get you 20% of the way there. And you do that in month 2 and 3. And hopefully by the end of the year, you've got like 80% of it done, and you can be like, hey, let's upsell you on this 5-figure ERP deal where, it'll only take us like 2 more weeks. And it seems like super frictionless now at that point for them. So I mean, the way that you explained it, I don't, again, see a lot of founders having gone through that, but that probably also is from, you guys having been around almost now for a full decade, right? And having that experience. So cool. Before we wrap things up here, like what's the current size of the company?
We're just in heads down execution mode is what I call it, right? So for many years felt like we knew what we needed to build and just continued building and going deeper. Essentially, we started out as inventory management, then just but a little deeper WMS features. So now we're warehouse management for e-commerce. But it became a question of like, what's next? We very much try to be ahead of the curve for our customers. So by that I mean like when they need some big new feature, we already have it. Walmart fulfillment services is growing right now. So we were one of the first to have that available for our customers, right? But also within that, there's a lot of change in our industry. And so for us, if we're on a sales call and we fit in every piece of their tech stack, already have native built integrations, it's plug and play essentially, like it's an easy sale, right? It's when they have legacy on-prem systems and different things that we can't just natively, plug into full data, and it becomes this bigger job, and then someone's got to build to the API, and it becomes a much harder sale. But also, as we see consolidation in the industry, we start saying, okay, like we know where we fit in today's ecosystem of software providers for our space, but what's that look like in 2 years? What's that look like in 5 years? And I don't know, right? You're guessing. You start seeing some of the consolidation moves. COVID has really sped that up in our industry, right? We're at the intersection of e-commerce and logistics, the two hot button topics with COVID, right? And so that means that there's a lot of investment money coming in. We're not actively raising right now. We're in a good position to just continue building and growing, but we're very much saying like, okay, let's just make sure we have the right features. So for example, we've released, it's just an extension of our product, but it's a feature set for third-party logistic warehouses, which was already one of our fastest growing segments. And there were some internal arguments of like, is this an adjacent product? And in a sense it is, right? The 3PL is slightly different from our e-commerce customer, although they have the same set of core needs. So it does increase our TAM in that way, which people like, right? But more importantly, we believe it's something we have to do for our core customers in the future. So when we started selling SkuVault, many of our customers had 1 to 5 of their own warehouses around the country. Now many of our customers have that plus 1, 2, or 3 different 3PL partners, and many of those 3PL partners are 3PL networks, meaning they have a lot of different warehouses within that network. And so people's inventory now with Walmart fulfillment services and FBA, it could be in 10, 20 different warehouses, and that's more and more common. And as that happens, like there's different challenges, and we want to be there to solve those challenges. And one way we have more of that data to help our customers is being in the 3PLs as well. Data transfer, tons of benefits from being in both those warehouses. So yeah, with that, we launched this 3PL bundle where you get these 3PL client portal and different things that the 3PLs need or should offer to their customers to make their lives easier, which also gives us our first like freemium user set. So a lot of really exciting, like first true upsell. We never had upsells because we never bundled out features. Like you buy the system, you get it all. So yeah, first true upsell. So great in that way, and just real exciting for the core customers as well as these new customers.
Like starting a business is hard. Obviously, starting a startup is hard, and before you kind of get to market fit, it's obviously you had some semblance of that very early on because like you're building it for this purpose for your friend, and then ultimately like be able to sell into the other customer in California. But between doing it through like friendly introductions to then like scaling it up to doing working with brands or companies that's like through cold outreach or through prospecting, like when did you get to that moment, and what are some of those experiences where it's like you had your back up against the wall where you weren't sure, like, is this the right path? Are we building something here that's of real value? Did you have any of those kinds of moments where you felt like that was like you had kind of like these different paths of feeling maybe a little bit lost?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the short answer would be talk to the customers, right? So we there have been different projects. Like there's one project that came to mind as you were asking that question, where we had a number of customers asking for Windows CE. So we've always been hardware agnostic, where any Android device, any Apple device, you can connect those type of scanners up to the software and it works fine. We did not support the older Windows CE units. And as we started selling more, I don't want to say enterprise, but of the larger customers we sell, or sold at the time, a lot of them had this older equipment that they'd bought in the past for different systems, and they said, "Hey, we want to use these Windows CE scanners because they were $2,000 a piece." Like, okay, well, I guess that makes sense. And we started building that, and I should have talked to more customers and done more research. Halfway through it, or maybe more, I realized like, oh, we can't even push updates to these. Like literally, they have to go hire some third party to come in and push updates. And I'm like, this is horrible. And I pulled the plug on it, and it was a lot of good bit of wasted development resources. But it became the feeling of like, hey, this, even if we do release this, it's a disservice to the customers, even the ones who already have the equipment. They can go buy $200 scanners that are going to work better and have automatic push updates and all these things, right? Like we do a lot of new features all the time. We're constantly releasing new stuff. So it's not like it used to be where twice a year you could come in and do your updates. Like eBay, Amazon, they change their API and we have to push an update, and it's just you got to have it, right? So yeah, pulled the plug, lost a little money on that project, but ended up knowing that it was the best decision for customers. But if I talked to more customers about that in the beginning before we started working on it, I probably would have known that, right? And saved those efforts for something more valuable.
On that note, I would just push that piece of advice: is always talk to customers at every stage of where you are, because I think that's at the end of the day, remove all your ego, because those are the people who are going to tell you and give you your North Star. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for doing this, Andy. It was really great to kind of like hear your journey. And then as I can only imagine you in middle school as like this entrepreneurial hustler with your buddy, like doing the eBay, reselling. And then it just kind of, feels like a very organic story in terms of like where you are today, but it's like, it all stems back to when you were like, as a teenager, which is awesome. Also like your buddy being kind of like your first customer essentially. So that's
well, in the intersection, like people are like, how do I come up with an idea? And I'm like, you get out there and do things, or you won't be in there deep enough to know what you could do, right? But also I really find it interesting, the intersection of industries, right? Like, so I was already in e-commerce. I learned a bit about industrial engineering and logistics, and then was able to apply that knowledge back into e-commerce. And it's like, if you're not in multiple things, you won't see those opportunities at the intersections.
That's a lot of, I think a lot of the founders that I've spoken to thus far, that's what happens, is they live life and they go through life, and then it's like a culmination of those experiences. I think the only difference is like inherently being a problem solver, and then, also opportunistic in the way of like, oh, this is something that I want to fix, but then like, how big is this problem? And is it something that I can scale up or like solve for a lot more people? And it's like going through iterations of it. So sometimes you choose that problem, you think it's big, but it's really not that big. And then you do find ultimately the right problem to solve by just, again, living through life and doing things. I can't agree more. Awesome. Thanks again so much for doing this, and success on the great growth that you guys got into so far. I can't wait to kind of see where you guys are in the next few years, and love to have you back, maybe like later towards the end of the year, get an update of where you guys are and stuff. Seems like you guys have a lot of your ducks in a row, and growth is just continuing to go for you guys.
Yeah, we're excited. And thank you, Chris. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks.